Hey, welcome back. This is a unusually bright video. I hope it works out well. I haven't given Mr. Producer an exotic problem. I got lights coming from every direction, and just to keep myself in theoretical under control, I made sure my major front light's the same one. Just so you know, Mr. Producer. Oh golly. So all right. Boy, what a bizarre line we have. We have I have a video, an image here, a monitor that shows me the pattern the light makes and that sort of thing. And so this one's different. Anyway, yeah, so welcome back. I want to thank David D. again for that nice contribution. I think you've done two sequentially that we hadn't thanked you for. So thank you last week, and I'm going to thank you again, David D. Your friendship has been a real benefit to the studio and to people out there um, receiving this information. So I got I got a note here from Daniel P. We may as well just put it up there. But I want to say, Daniel, you made a couple comments about that you want me to respond to you online by an email, and you'll pay me for it, and as if I was holding back. And I didn't leave those lines in here in this comment that I'm putting it out in public. But I want you all to know that I'm not asking for money. I mean, I love donations, and we need it, and Mr. Producer needs to get paid. But but I wouldn't be. I'm giving you everything I know, free of charge. I'm not holding back. And so I made a statement that's going to be here at the end of the video. I want you all to look at it. First of all, outlining everything I'm doing, going to tell you today mostly, and giving you the background. And and that's going to be for free as well. But so you can look at it later, or well, you can look at it now, I guess, can't you? You can just jump ahead. Funny how that works, isn't it? Beautiful New England day. Spring's been very, very friendly this year. Week full of rain, but everything's turning the most marvelous green, so we'll take it. Daniel says, I'm painting a still life, intending to finish it more like your warm and cool painting, except for the swan effect. Now, I'm going to show Daniel's image of what he's working on, which I think it's the one you set with to be, Daniel. And but the first thing I want to say about this, number one, Daniel's not the first person who's mentioned wanting to know more about warm and cool, and I didn't really see my way to doing anything about it earlier, and everything I tell you about starts, how I approach painting, is all done in all my paintings. It's all done the same way. I don't have a different approach for landscape, and I'm going to show you a Tarbell landscape to show you how this process is similar to his and how it must work. A lot of people think that I took a different approach because it's a complex picture. We've responded to that before. It's the same approach. The beauty of our approach is that it's best at complex. It's actually at its most obvious. What's the right word? Maximum value when the scenario that you're painting, and as an impressionist, is complex. This methodology is ideal for that. But that's not what Daniel means. We'll write on. I'm painting a still life, intending to finish it more like your warm and cool painting, except for the swan effect. There I was imitating your violinist painting. Now, let me talk about imitating. I mean, when you're young students, and Daniel was with me for a bit, a year ago or so, but when you're, imitating paintings, I mean, is a way to learn. I mean, and I don't know, but that painting is simply the same as the violinist painting is the same process exactly as the interior painting. It just happens to have been pushed just slightly more past, into a more clarifying realism because it's the nature of portraits. to my mind anyway. There's some more necessity but the approach totally the same, Daniel. But this isn't. But watch out for this idea of finishing it like. I intending to finish it more like. It's a process. If you finish it more like you didn't, you're not going to get it because it's not a look. It's not an appearance. I mean, that's a coincidence of the methodology, and that's the one thing I'd really like to get across to everyone, to all my viewers, that I'm not trying to get a this kind of look or that kind of a look, a Sargent look, a lost and found look, a painterly look. I don't have those ambitions. As I said, my goal is to render the truth in front of me with as much authenticity. And let me say again, it's the interpretation of the truth in front of me, but it's only my response to it, but it's still entirely based. And so my training is entirely based on, my evolution of a method is entirely based on the idea of getting a likeness. Right, not on buying into other people's styles and other people's methods and all that sort of stuff. Anything like that's a coincidence in my development. Okay. Certain people, I think I talked about this recently in the copies one, that certain people do certain things very well, and let us say the way they approach a thing like an edge has more truth to nature than certain kinds of other edges. Certain clawed-out edges. When you look at nature and life, anything in life, you almost never find that kind of an edge unless you're talking about a ratty edge of a leaf or something like that from a distance. You might see something of a ratty edge like that, but mostly the edges of values in paintings have more fluidity than that. So you say that's not a stylistic thing, though, although. You might say whoever did it first. The effect of it was so true that it became a thing to acquire, not to imitate as much as to acquire, because it gave you more truth to nature. Much as like what we're finding out about Monet, you need to acquire the knowledge of how to get those qualities of three or full spectrum light, right? So do you have any advice to paint it more like Warm and Cool? So my first advice, Daniel, to paint it more like Warm and Cool is going to be to approach it the way I approach it. All right? And I'm going to talk about that. So I mean certain techniques and ways of seeing the still life. I'll talk about those things. I know squinting, blurring your eyes can help you see the primary light effects and major color value units. That's a good thing to have said. Although the seeing color is never a question of squinting your eyes. It's always a question of keeping your eyes big. But values themselves, you can see the orientation of values. A middle tone will tend more toward a dark or more toward a light. If you blur your eye, you can see which side it's choosing, so you can get it off that halfway mark. Not that there aren't such good places. I mean, there might be a halfway mark in some pictures. Similarly, there seems to be a lot of atmosphere in my Warm and Cool painting, an examination of light. Now, in my statement to you that's at the end of this thing, I'm telling you that that's a byproduct. It's a product of getting the right color, the right value in the right place. Yes, if you are not aware of the sense of atmosphere and all those sorts of things and the quality of the light of the day, you can be thinking you're getting values all day long, but if you're not getting those aren't useful values. You better revisit the values and the value relationships, the colors and the color relations, the chroma and the chromal relationships. So you follow that a bit, Daniel, but I'll talk about this with pictures in a second. Okay, so maybe a big question is how much form to depict. Now that is an interesting one. How much form to depict versus kind of summarizing the form for a big visual impression. Yeah, I mean, it's not how much to depict, it's about how much to depict when. If you're talking about form, so we're after the major forms, like the skull, the egg of the head is a far more important form to have established in the great movement of values than all the parts on that, the eyes, nose, and all that sort of thing. That is, as far as form goes, we work from the greater to the lesser. It's a real thing. So it's a question of timing, right? But how do you manage? That's one of the great questions is how do you manage the egg, the skull form, while you're also finding that the nose or eye are blasting off the page because of the contrast between their shadow and their light. So those are, of course, those are the questions that you can only answer in practice, by putting the time in. Maybe a big question is how much form to depict. Okay. Similarly, it seems to me I spend too much time modeling the form through the vase design as opposed to capturing it more loosely. Well, loosely is a matter of timing, right? I think I've said to you before, like I can noodle up a charcoal drawing, but I've learned to express it loosely first and get around to see the thing as a whole in a loose and mobile look. Well, we have that too. So capturing it isn't, capturing it more loosely, you're talking about a stylistic thing. Like sometimes certain of Sargent's watercolors or other things have this loosey-goosey thing about them. It's, this isn't a question of style for me. It's a question of timing. It's a question of when. So loose is always a thing. We say loose in the start. It's a mobile molecule that as it gets closer and closer to becoming the human, this molecule has chosen its place in the body, has solidified it and become fixed part in a sense of being. Now, you might say tight versus loose, okay? I hear this, by the way. I'm not in any kind of this field. I don't know. The medical field. I think I can easily say I'm one of the guys that squirm at the entire discussion. I'm like C.S. Lewis that way. He said if God wanted me to see what was inside me, he would have put it on the outside. But anyway, why did I say that? But plus how much lostness to put into values in low contrast areas. That's a really good question, and that's again a question of early versus late, and it's a question of what is your end. So if you're already fully expressed, if you look at, for example, the Benson we talk about with the three girls, you can see that it's a really beautiful example of a picture that's not noodled in every area. Somebody asked me, I appreciate that question that he sent to me by email about what is noodling. Or not by email, it was under the last video. What was your name? Oh, I thought I'd remember it. It was like Hydra or something like that, I think. So much of what we're talking about is a timing issue. So we'll talk about it in these areas, about certain areas being treated loosely, but it's not a question of wanting. I'm sorry, lost, but it's not a question of putting in lostness. It's a question of not drawing things before their time and keeping them expressed as part of larger unities. When two values meet, perhaps some part of this jacket here is meeting the red part of the shirt, and if these two values are the same value for some time, you won't do anything. You might draw a silhouette if there's one over here. You might find yourself drawing a silhouette over here. In the meantime, this will be hanging together as one value with color changes, but it'll be hanging together because the value is the same. That's called lostness. So if you know you're not into, if you think you need to be into this and this and this and this and this and this all the way across when your real issue is this, then you're in a stage, then you're gonna hold yourself up. You're gonna cause all sorts of alarming exit work and loss of time and all that stuff. You won't get to the end of your start. Plus how much lostness to put into values in low contrast areas. So there you are, kind of seeing how you approached your warm and cool painting. So let's go to pictures, Daniel. Thank you for the question. I was laughing at myself because I hear people say that all the time. Thank you for the question. Come on a political stage, especially when they don't really want to hear the question. Thank you for that question. It's a good way of getting yourself in gear. Now, Daniel, who's a relative beginning student, has done a pretty nice picture here. This picture is, and you're working, it looks like, Daniel, with a strong sense of visual order. And you're using the paint in some places more loosely than others, but it looks like you're working in the right places and doing a reasonable job. I don't know how to take anything I do in painting and apply it stylistically to another painting. Our method gets you that. Now, you may already have, essentially, and I'd say in large part you do have the warm and cool painting right here. But remember this, what Gamel's comment was, if you don't have, if the painting doesn't have these particular qualities that you see in a different painting, you're not going to get them out of this painting. I can't make this thing more atmospheric, shall we say, than it is. So if you can just stay on that idea, though, that the painting can only be as beautiful or as what it is. It can only be what it is. It can't be what it ain't. So don't try to bring something into this picture that's not appropriate to this, that isn't there. It's a still life. You're painting your slice of nature. Another one of the reasons you hear me say that when you come before your subject, your job is to drop everything you think you know, even the things you did in the last painting, and just look at nature and let it start directing you. You then become a servant of the arts, right? You become a servant of the visual impression. And you say, what would make the most sense? How can I get to your point fastest? What are the efficiencies? Do I do it this way or do I do it that way? And somebody would say, we always start in the middle and do that. Somebody else would say, we always start with the exits, or somebody, who knows what? I mean, so you follow that, okay? So here's the picture. I'm showing it this way so you can see my face for a second while I getting that message, Mr. Bridges. I hate to micromanage your editing, but this has a lot of qualities like the other painting. But one of the things it has is the appearance of being less articulated in little areas. I'm surprised that this painting is this fuzzy. I thought I had a clear image of it here. So I apologize to everybody. There's not as sharp edge as it ought to be, and that sort of thing. But you'd be talking about passages like this, where this area is laid in broad, general color movement ways, and there's a bit of drawing here, and a bit of drawing right there, and certain other spots set up the entire area. A piece like this would be drawn before many other things, that little spot right there. That's the approach to painting. That's an approach to painting. So lost areas, this area was lost for a very long time. There wasn't even much to draw at the edge where this thing meets this thing. You can see if you blow your eyes how non-existent that is. So the drawing in this area would have been evolved from this point, and these things here, maybe from that highlighted leaf there. And so it goes. Even and I'll show you another start in a second, it's an interior as well, a far less complex one. But hopefully you can begin to, as I go through this, you can begin to grasp the visual order approach. So if you blur your eye at this painting, this is Daniel. This is maybe slightly more in focus. Is this my screen? This is unfortunate because this painting is not fuzzy like this. I should start over. I don't have time. We're under a deadline today, so I won't. But understand that so many of these things you're seeing down here sharp. These are sharp edges. This one over here isn't that lost. That sort of thing. This isn't a fuzzy-looking painting. But if you blur your eyes, you'll know what the major masses were. Like a big mass like this coming down and ending right here at this end. You'd see this as your leading effect, and you would just. So when I go through a conversation with you, Daniel, I take the same approach to painting every single time. I start spotting some colors wrong. Maybe a color like this that I happen to like. Maybe I set this blue in the middle and wonder about it. And this note here, wonder about this one. It's one of the darks. And this one, the dark is dark. I'll spot these around. I'll make the darks a little smallish. My statement at the end sums all this stuff up too. But I'm hitting these color notes just as spots, as you might say an impressionist would, just to see if I could find the colors we're going to work with. So I'm saying, what can my darkest dark note be? And so if you use straight up black, you're going to get a picture that's inky. But if you're looking at this thing as a whole and you're seeing that this doesn't come across as black, a dead black, then you'll say my darkest dark, if that's my darkest dark, I'm going to have to get that with color quality. So you'll start adding alizarin because it's the darkest red we have, and then beginning to see what it's going to take. And then you'll say, but I don't know where this dark is. Is that a similar dark to that? Or these, or I don't know which is the darkest dark, but they might put a couple of them out there with the idea of saying, let's find out what it's going to take, because I want these to be live color quality darks. But you'll be spending other times, you'll be spending times finding out what the blue is, the red, you'll get some of this green going down here. But you don't have to get around and around it, you just have to get around enough. I mean, indefinitely. I mean, you don't have to pick 1,000 spots out there. But you got to get around enough to begin to tell yourself what this picture, well, not just to tell yourself it, but to show yourself on the canvas next to yourself. By the way, I know this is all reiterative, but because of the specifics of his question, who knows what might come toward you here, right? I know it's kind of more of a nuisance going back and listening to old videos than it is to hear it afresh. New contexts always make a difference. But there's some really significant stuff. This value is a big deal value. This might have been where I got the idea of warm and cool. Here's two lights, and they sit up there both rather similarly. And then these are two very significant lights, and these sit up here this is warm to gold, and this is in the blue side. And so, but you can see that these are all part of beginning to understand your color field that you're going to be working in. So I will have set this note here and this note here and looked at them to each other, not because I'm trying to get the rug, but because I'm trying to get the reds in this picture. The rest of what you might call some of the reds or the rest of the field. Now understand that if what I'm doing, and I'm just doing this as a march through, it's in writing at the end of this thing, you can just read it there. So a version of it, right? I wish I'd asked you to be on here just to just to clarify this for yourself and ask questions, or have anybody be on here with me to see if I'm coming across. But the process is that, and then the process is one of clarifying the color by bringing two, like you've had this dark here, and you'd bring this to this because this is your leading effect. Now it's not you're drawing this object here, you're just articulating this. And I say this because I always try to find the leading effect and a point. Like a corner is a very good thing because you can locate it. How far above or below center is that? Where does that land this way? And so that's a thing that you can do as a starting point. You want to get that in the right place. But I want you to understand that we are setting up our darkest dark and lightest lights as a function of the color problem, of the color value problem. And if you don't put down the sharpness of the edge, you won't be able to see whether or not you won't be able to see what you've got, shall we say, by way of an effect. Now, one of the things I'm trying to make clear is that when we do these effects, and this is to you, Sean, in particular, that we're not just going to go around and just do effects all over the place. We're doing this effect because we want to know what the leading effect is. But we can say, let the rest of it be a matter of, for example, finding the exits. You know, there's some very significant exits, but each one of them, maybe this one would be the ideal one, has a definite effect. This dark meets this light. This dark is such and such to the darkest dark. And this light is such and such to the lightest light by both color and whatever. And then when they meet to create this exit, I have this opportunity to set up something that becomes part of this bigger discussion, just like the field we had of color scheme. We now are beginning to have a field of what I call the arabesque, which is the field of phenomena as they relate to each other in space. But it's also just the beginning of composition. So you might want this one over here because it's so telling in its value to value plus edge. Exits are always important. This line becomes hugely important to locate that thing in a picture like this because it's changing. All the proportions in here are being affected by that drama over there rather than the edge of the canvas. But do you see where I'm going with this? So the first thing you're doing whenever two values meet, and you keep them far from each other and keep a lot of white canvas at the beginning, but when they start meeting, you're doing them strategically to find out your lightest light and darkest darks and begin to sort out your composition, each of which part you make slowly and systematically and articulate well and relationally, that in relation to every other thing you put in. So every time you add something new to this picture, you're doing it strategically to inform your composition, see what the composition is doing. And each time you do it, you're also improving the colors and adjusting the colors. Like when you bring these two together, you suddenly realize that these two colors aren't right to each other, that this should have been more blue and this one should have been more colored, should have had more chroma to it or something like that. You're going to see to do this last bit of correcting as you're in the process of finding this, shall we say again, for the purpose of beginning the process of setting up the effect relationships in the visual order, but also the beginning of the composition, which is what I think of as the two-dimensional organization of it. Gamma might say of the say the big dark spot here popping over into this spot, or the series of darks, or the general middle tone through it with light spots set up and dark spots set up. Do you see what I mean? But you see, this is all 2D organizational stuff, and of course 2D meaning sizes, like the size of my finger to my hand, size relationships. It's also two-dimensional. None of it's three-dimensional in anything except accidentally by intimation. So that's our process, going round and round, and we do it relatively loosely except at joints like this. But what you're going to find is you're going to get to a spot, for example, you'll have this, and then you'll finally realize you need this, and there'll be a certain amount of generalization that happens in this area. There'll be a movement of colors that you can allow to happen here, and you can allow yourself to close this space, but don't get lost. This is in the lay-in I'm talking about now. Don't get lost in painting every little thing in here for a while. That's where we're talking about that kind of a massed unity. We're not looking to see what's happening. But on the other hand, when you do start closing masses, you say you set up an effect. Let's say you were here and you had say here. Let me back off on that for a second. There are better areas. This is a very good area here that has a generalization that we're not going to go inside and try to find things on. But if you see a color movement or a value movement in there that's part of keeping that goes, it's still a unified area. This would be a good example of this whole light here moving into a middle tone, moving into a dark. You might just be filling this area in, but you don't fill it in simplistically. You fill it in along the lines of a value movement. There might be a chromal movement. In this area over here, you can see this orangey thing turning into a different kind of a red traveling through here, or this warmer turning into a cool traveling through here. But in the meantime, you could say these are generalized units that feel like they just sort of belong together. You don't see contrasting areas in them to speak of, right? So, but expect there to be movements. This one implies one right here, the darker here and lighter there, but it still looks like this big unit. So don't underestimate that when you start massing, there's an intelligence even in that. And the way you adjust it is you keep looking at it in big ways, so you don't just, you want to put this in simplistically. If you call it the wall, you probably will. But if you're thinking of it as a value unit, you'll also be aware that when you paint the unity, you're going to paint it from warmer up here to cooler down here, because that's the way it appears, or you might say from redder to yellower or to bluer or whatever. Those are all the realities of our units. This is a good unit from the point of view of it hangs together as an object. And if you blur your eye, it's not that bad. But all this stuff here could be said to be part of this unity. But on the other hand, when you start pulling stuff together, you'll have articulated stuff up here and down here or here, and you'll be seeing a need to sort of gradually pull that together. Well, if there's a movement in it like this, pull it together with that being lighter there, oranger and darker here, and going down and down and down. Okay. So that's just a thing to add to this. Read the thing at the end. You'll understand this better. I would recommend you guys go through that, read it, listen to this again, read it again. But our process is one that is an articulative process. We're articulating the look of nature. The finish is in the start, is what we like to say. So when you're always looking for things that are strategically setting up your composition, but you're expressing them with finish. So the look of nature here, and particularly I mean in as a comparative look to here, whatever edge relation, whatever contrast relations these have, should be right to each other. This contrast should be right to this contrast. The sharpness of edge should be different if it's different, and so on. So it's always relational, even when you're going all over the place to find out the elements that make up this composition. And again, as I said, you blur your eyes a lot. You'll find yourself in grand unities that you might never have otherwise understood, like this kind of stuff in here. Just what you're trying to do, and our way of working, is work with the majors as a setup. And that will include unifying this whole thing into a kind of a generalization. And this is where that discussion of looseness comes in. You're not in here, getting pretty smoothnesses and things like that at the beginning. In fact, you're purposely showing this area as just a busy-ish area by just using broken color, broken values, and not closing it in. Yeah, there'll be a movement out of the more golden ones into whatever it is, and a little bit darker down as the most are here, winding up in these lights here. But you can see maybe with me that this might be thought of as a large unit. You can see way bigger than that, but that just gets you going a little bit. I mean, in the end, you'll see that this to this to this are three different pieces on a blue unit, and there's the fourth one or whatever. Okay, now I don't know what else I can say on that. Let me just look at one more time at your comment. How much form to depict versus kind of summarizing the form for the big impression. Yeah, that's again back to that mentality. So this could be said to be a big form right through here, right? How much form to depict. But I'm not going down here to model legs on chairs until I see the need for them. I do see the need for this thing here to be located. And that's where I can go show you the next painting. There's things like this where you can see the implied flatness of a wall. You can see you might say the form of the room even. You can see a little bit of a sense of the woman's form, this lovely young intern, and at this gallery in Boston, the Guild. But you can see that some of what I'm doing is finding points that are going to be useful in establishing the exits are being established, exits, but the leading effect is also in here, right? So this is Sean, back to you again. There's a combination of things we need to know by way of anchor what our leading effects can do, what it's going to take to produce them, so we can see what range we have to live in. This is called keying on numbers of levels. But they still need to be well placed, which means we have to get around to some certain elements of the composition. Exits here would certainly help us with this, if this is something we can more easily see, that proportion, say this to this. But leave it at that, though, that what we're trying to establish here is, first of all, color spots and the general canvas being covered with the value scheme, and then a process that operates from points into mass. So it's important to me I could have this going all day, but I need to know where that's located. You can see I left this part out, and that wasn't purpose. It was actually weak there at those spots in relation to the wall. If you blur your eyes, you can see how I might have seen that wall. But I was trying to point out that I'm making points like this and points like this and not drawing legs of chairs. And it's because they're strategic value. But then I jumped on to talking about exits because in this painting, they're obviously hugely strategic. And they are in all paintings, where this goes out, where this goes out. These are not inconsequential things in a painting like this. And where these go out and all that sort of thing. So, but this is our way of setting up a picture is all over the place at once, all the horses at once. All the horses are the colors, the values, and the effects. The values, by the way, colors and the chroma range. So every time we put something down, it lives in multiple categories, and it certainly contains, shape. You might say in a limited sense, and you might say in the greater sense of a thing like this. I'm saying shape now. I mean, this is an ovoid. This becomes its own object, and how wide is it in general, whatever, for how wide it is, and how does that tilt of that abstraction work? There's these kinds of things all through this whole. It's just full of them. And the more you can articulate the look of whatever it is that you're making those out of, the more you progress. So the finish is even in the start. So, yeah. One of the aims at the start is to get the relative busiest areas to be operating busily. The strongest areas to be leading, so this is sort of a center of interest modality. And learning, again, how to not draw. So areas like this could just sit there and be broadly simplified for some very long period of time. Or areas even like this, where the chair eventually is going to show up, the rest of this table is going to show up. There's lots more in these areas, but there's a large expression here that through broad unities is covering up or holding, sort of holding back this extra wave of drawing that we aren't ready for yet. Now I'm showing you this Tarbell, Daniel, to help you to see what I mean. The general impression says be here. For example, it says to get the richness of this color note and distribute the greens, you know. Get the whole color scheme. So the fullness of these blues aren't inconsequential, and these other blues up here, and their general play of blues throughout the entire painting winds up being very serious, right? But this is exactly the way you would have seen me starting the interior that I've done. It's the same process. And but you can see that where it's textured, he's not painting leaves. And by the way, this may be flat in the sense of shadows being flat, but you've seen under trees that even though there's a significant flatness, it may not present adequately. So the general impression would say, let this be textured, even though it's going to maintain its general value. But that's an overall thing. This is smooth in here, right? This strongly suggests smoothness, flatness. Now, if form goes, this thing is presenting as form. These are presenting mostly as activity, right? This thing presents as like it looks like somebody should have mowed the lawn before he went out there, doesn't it? It has this little hectic noise. It doesn't really present as a flat lawn the way we like them eventually. But this presents as a roundness, as a fullness of form. You could even argue this rather does, because of this movement of values through here presents as a form. But you can see we're not into the littleness of articulation. We're trying to get the players that are useful, like the power of this thing is very useful. The power of this thing is very useful to set up the composition. So we're trying to get the big general impression coloristically, and we're trying to then bring it the rest of the way on the wings of the composition, shall we say? And the rest of the way includes getting this value right to this value and cutting that edge because it's significant, or even a piece of it up here and this up here, because you're trying to establish the order of effects, among other things, right? I don't feel like I'm doing this adequate justice, but I think my statement at the end is so summary that I think you can manage to get somewhere with that. And then what I gave you here is another list of recommendations that I put in the start video, the start sampler that I have. And if you all would like to have a copy of those pictures, I have a handful, quite a number of pictures by the Boston School guys and me and Sarge and some other guys, and then this whole discussion about the start is there. I present it in a video format somewhere in my videos. So look for this word start or lay in or whatever, and you should find all this. I'm not sure I handed you this list of things you might consider doing. But ask me for it. I'll just send it to you if you haven't had a copy of it, so you'll be able to see all the starts of the Boston School. I did want to put another start in here, but I think this one will have to do. But I hope you can grasp how that and this could be done the same way, could be approached the same way. Again, if you blur your eye at either one of these, you'll begin to see what to draw early and what to draw late. One of the things that happens to is you begin to realize you can understand the design better once you see the darks in an interplay. You see all these darks and how they're sitting out here and sitting out here, and this dark here, and then this guy here. You begin to see this as a grand unity. And you can say the same thing about the lights and the way they interplay, right? You begin to say, oh yeah, look at that. There's the game of the lights. Now, but if you blur down, you'll realize that is what you're going for. You might say that when your start is done, that big play should be out there. Your composition should show as a massing, the thing should be fully feeling like it's unified as a mass. And one of the elements of that mass will be some level of what I'm calling articulate finish, which is exactly what you're seeing here. By the way, here's one where he's massing and he actually is painting a movement. In all these things, by the way, there's a color movement through here. There are color movements all the time in this guy's painting. So I'm saying when you're filling in these masses, you might have set something up, say with this edge over here on this blue, and you might have gotten yourself working over somewhere else like here. But to whatever extent these things pull together, if they have a movement in them, paint them with that movement. Just don't stop in there and start drawing things, okay? That'll end your fun. Okay. Even in here, one of the values of the put it down and leave it, make a mark and leave it model is that every time you put down a mark and walk, if you take that time to then walk back and look at the hole, instead of keeping your eyes down there, see if it looks like a chair yet. But you come back and look at the hole, you'll be inclined not to work more here. You'll be inclined to set that note up here or set it up over here. You'll be inclined to just keep the color moving in these kinds of mark ways. So, yeah. Daniel, I think that your question is a hugely important one. But just let me end by repeating that there's nothing about this is stylistically organized. The method is a lost and found method. I paint from the found, guys. And I blow on great unities with real quality color movements, but without, in any kind of an early fashion, making the data, like those lines in that couch thing back there, those were nowhere in there early by any means. And I wasn't starting at the top and painting to the bottom of this. I was blurring my eyes, and this thing was important early. Some of this was important early, even that little corner. These are what I call setup points, right? But once you're in that area, but before you're there, you're talking about being here to being all the way over here and talking about the unity of this mass. That you might think of that as ending with this thing down here, and you might articulate it so as to get this abstraction that I call an ovoid again, to get that abstraction. So, but what I'm saying that really is the crucial thing is that there's a looseness in lots of areas, and if you blur eyes just a little bit of this thing almost came in way, way, way at the end. It's tempting to leave it out because it's so unneeded in one sense. And I'm talking about the lack of any kind of serious articulation down here to make this plant. But what I do put down when I'm articulating, when I think of this as the edge of this mass, or this is the edge of something bigger than itself, I articulate the heck out of it because it's got to carry the ball for a very long time. And we don't know how long. So it's got all this burden that has to be strong and good. And by the way, once you put that down the first time, the next part of your discussion is you're thinking you're making that perfect the first time. You're going to see before you know it, you're going to see that you have to move it just a little bit and be willing and ready to do that as you get more data in the picture and begin to see your composition better. Don't be so, that's why the start wants to be finished in the first day. All these major guys want to be not just in places, and you don't want to measure them into places. They don't want to be just in their places, but they want to be in their places in concert with this and with whatever else are these significant players around the room that you found useful, so you can see the composition, so you can see the unity, as Meldrum would say, of the general impression. Okay? So that's one thing I would just want to repeat to you. There's an element of articulation of the truth in front of you whenever you're making something. Now you can see this one is not as fine as it will be, but it's in this area of what I call adequate. This isn't brilliant, but it's adequate, both in shape and in contrast, shall we say, or this. And these things all are there's an attempt here to make these as effectively as I can in relation to each other, but without getting so lost in them that you can't cover the canvas intelligently, okay? Keep in mind that one of the things that causes you to be efficient in our way of thinking is knowing, in my case, that I want to cover the canvas in a half hour. I'm sorry, in a half a day, or in 2 hours. And it doesn't matter to me if I do it in 6 hours, but I want to do it, as I said in the past, I try to lay it in on Friday so I can come into a dry painting on Monday. And it reminded me of Rodrigo saying he's having trouble getting pictures to dry. Most of the areas I paint dry overnight. Well, two things might be happening. Sometimes your mediums can do that, but other times you might just be painting more thickly than you ought. And so that's one, back to the whole idea of make sure you maintain the thickness of the paint, the rule of thumb of only paint it as thickly as you need to. Ang says that's the right amount of paint. He was looking at a wall painter. The right amount of paint, you're not going to put on extra paint and waste paint because you're paying money for that. But you make sure you cover the wall because the customer is paying money for that too. So you make sure it's a beautiful wall without you wasting money. That's a silly thing to say, but it's a fun way to address it. So, but use the right amount of paint. Keep the quality of the paint. You have to fill the interstices with these marks. And but you know, the old rule, thin in the start, or whatever it is, thin in the start is a thing. And even in the first few marks, I put down solid paint, chunks I can look at, but then I immediately spread them out so they aren't thick, to the right amount of no thickness. And then when you go around to adjust this and do it 2 and 3 times, you're not building up ridges and fighting the paint that's underneath to make the adjustments. And keep on remembering that painting, this whole thing about lay-ins, is about putting down notes and adjusting, put down notes and adjusting, not about perfection of matching notes and trying to see if it comes out okay. Or hoping at the end that it comes out okay after you've matched 1,000 notes. All right. I think I better call it a day, Daniel. I hope you can follow this. I don't hold back. There are no secrets in my methodology. I didn't do anything in this painting that I don't do in a portrait, that I don't do in a still life, and that I also don't do in a landscape, which is why I thought it useful to bring that landscape in. All right, I think we're done. And that went for quite a while, actually, longer than I thought. So thank you all again. Thank you, David, for your donations. Thank you all for sharing and liking and subscribing. I don't know how to guarantee that you guys get these blogs. I still don't know how. I think if you go into the section called Community, when you go to the Paul Ingebretson talks about painting, there's an area they tell me called Community. Hit that and you'll see these blogs. So anytime you don't see me in a timely way, I've tried to produce a blog for you. In any case, what you're going to see now at the end of this is this statement by me with Dan, addressed to Dan, with my signature on it, that tries to cover exactly the same territory, telling you that I'm not holding back any secrets. None. Except the things you'd have to get by experience. And even those, if you ask me more closely, I can tell you those. I don't hold back anything. So I want you to know that nobody's paying me money to do this. I know that when I have people in a studio, they got to pay the rent of the building and stuff like that. So I have to charge people for that. And I'm also seeing you tons more than a person could do here, but hands-on is far better. So there's a reason to pay in that situation. But you see me, this is a gift. I'm giving this to you as straightforwardly as I can and as graciously. I'm not holding back. I did have a woman who asked me how to paint flesh tones once, and if you're listening to, I hope you're keeping your sense of humor. But I said I paint them with the same palette. I just see I'm using this red, yellow, and blue, and the whites and the blacks, and she says, "Oh, you artists hold back. You just keep your secrets to yourself." And I don't. I've never been that guy. I enjoy every idea related to painting. And part of the pleasure I get is talking about it. So you guys are just the hopefully happy recipients of that. In any case, bye. This is getting too long for Mr. Producer. All right. Thank you all. See you next time. I hope you have a great week.